Hi, everybody. I'm Time Senior Correspondent Charlotte Alter, and welcome back to Time's first ever Voices of the Future Women's Summit. Still ahead are Kate Blanchett, Raquel Willis, and an inspiring musical performance from Milk. But right now, I'm very glad to be joined by author and Black Lives Matter movement co-founder Patrisse Cullors and Dolores Huerta, the president of the Dolores Huerta Foundation and a famed labor activist. Patrisse and Dolores, I'm so thrilled to have you here. This is such a dream conversation to welcome you both.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Obviously, this has been a period over the last 5 years, really, of tremendous social and political change, and both of you have been at the forefront of that. Dolores, I want to start with you. How do the social movements that have arisen during the Trump era compare to the movement building of the 1960s, which you were obviously very involved in? What's easier and also what's harder?
Well, I think the one thing that we've seen is that it's very integrated. We've seen the marches for Black Lives Matter have a great diversity in them. Of course, there's always been the young people, because the young people are always they push everything forward, but also the fact that it's been so diverse. And I think that's one of the things. The other thing, it was so spontaneous, and that it capitulated not only here in the United States, but all over the world, where we saw these incredible marches. The same thing, we can say the same thing about the movement against gun violence that was started again by the young people in Parkland and Florida. And I think the one thing that has made this mobilization much easier is the fact that we have cell phones, and that people can be mobilized so quickly. People can be informed. And so everything can happen like within minutes, you might say, that people can gather and protest or march and picket, whatever it is. And so I think that in today's world, that really gives us a lot of hope, because that means that we can challenge some of these issues that we have to reform, and we can do it very quickly and do it all together.
Patrisse, can you tell me a little bit about how this diversity and intersectionality was sort of built into the Black Lives Matter movement from the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, you look at Black Lives Matter and you recognize that there are 3 Black women who really started it. And we all are at the intersections of queerness and being raised working class, and also Opal Tometi being a daughter of Nigerian immigrants. And our lived experience really helped shape a different kind of conversation in building out Black Lives Matter. From the very first article that Alicia Garza wrote, the Her Story of BLM, really setting the tone for an intersectional movement, a movement that really fights for all Black lives, a movement that looks at gender justice, a movement that looks at economic justice, a movement that looks at not just the death of Black people, but how Black people will thrive, and what is needed for Black communities to thrive. And so intersectionality was always a center point for our movement, and it was always the foundation for how we've grown.
Do you think it matters that at least in the last several years, so many of these movements have been led by women? How do you think that changes the way these movements have grown, and also the way they've interacted with one another?
Well, I think that is what is so amazing, that women are in the leaderships and the instigators and the organizers of so many of these movements that we see today. And women have always participated, but I think now they are now being recognized as being the leaders, and because often women did all of the work, and then somehow they were just kind of put to one side. Even the Great March on Washington that we know, when Dr. King made his one beautiful speech, there were a lot of women that were there, but they were not recognized. And so I think this is what's different. And I think we have to thank the women's movement for doing this. And I think it also started with the Women's March, because that was one of the great big, you might say, mass celebrations where women again got together all over the world. Not just here in the United States, but all over the world. And I think that it set a standard that women have to be recognized, because, women, we've always done the work, but oftentimes we're just not the ones that get to be the spokespersons or the so-called recognized as the leaders of what we're doing.
Patrisse, what do you think about that? How do you think it has helped the movement to have this be a movement that's not just led by one woman, but led by really many women and men as well? How do you think it has strengthened or helped the movement to have women be in such key roles?
I think, as Dolores said to us, women were always in key roles. They just didn't get the visibility. And women have been the architects of social movements for a very long time. And we have lifted up, because of patriarchy, because of sexism, we've lifted up men and the work that men do. And the work that women have done have largely been work that has been invisible labor. And so I think the way in which we've been able to reclaim women and the role that they play, especially women of color, is through social media. Social media has democratized our voices. And so we haven't needed mainstream media to tell our story. And what you've seen from that is a really powerful surge of Black women, and Latinx women, undocumented women, Arab women, Muslim women, across race, but also trans women who have shown up, and their voices have been forced at the forefront. And that has been really powerful and I think really necessary. And I think it's been hard too, because it means with great visibility comes great responsibility. And also it means that you are going to be a target, often of violence. And there's so many studies that have shown that women are often more targeted when they're more visible, and it's often violently. And so it comes with great sacrifice, women in our visibility, but I think it's really worth it to push a new generation forward.
So Patrisse, I just want to follow up on, talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. Obviously, prison abolition has been a major topic of conversation in the years since George Floyd's murder. Can you tell me a little bit about your vision for what prison abolition looks like in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to just do a quick shout out to Miriam Kaba, who just launched her book almost a week ago, We Do This Till We Free Us. And it's a book on abolition and transformative justice and organizing. And it's now on the bestsellers list. And so, I think about our elders. I think about our ancestors who are abolitionists in particular, Harriet Tubman specifically, and the work that she did, not just to free enslaved Africans, but also the work she did to communicate around the vision for abolition, and communicating that to the North, to get the North on board, to challenge the ways in which slavery was impacting Black communities and also impacting everybody. And so this conversation around modern day prison abolition is really a conversation for us to interrogate why prisons and police exist in the first place, and to have a new conversation about what does public safety actually look like? Is public safety reliant on a badge and a gun? Or is public safety reliant on people's ability to have access to healthy food, have access to jobs, have access to employment, have access to adequate education? And so that is the conversation about prison abolition. It's not just about getting rid of something, it's about imagining something new.
Wonderful. So on this note, I want to ask both of you about sort of how these grassroots movements are shaping the electoral political system. So Dolores, to what extent do you think movement leaders need to be thinking about the electoral process as they build their coalitions and shape their demands?
Well, we know that this is the end of the road. This is what we all have to organize towards, to make sure that people vote, because marching and protesting and all that is extremely necessary to inform people, to communicate our message, to actually get people to become activated. But if we don't end up voting, then it's all for naught. because the people that we elect are the ones that are going to decide to make the laws. And just we're talking about the whole prison, stopping the school to prison pipeline. And we know that so many of the laws out there that have been made are the ones that are affecting people of color. And I want to say, and poor white folk too, low income people, because these are the people that are incarcerated, and they have made the prison industry a for-profit industry. And this is when you think how much of every budget of every community goes into policing and how much money is spent. And I like to quote Jesse Jackson, who used to say, it takes more money to keep somebody in jail than it does to send them to Yale. And this is, of course, connected to our educational system also. So that is one thing that we really have to think about where our tax dollars are going. And are they going towards education, towards social work, or are they going to keep people in prisons?
Yeah, I mean, I think electoral justice is one part of the larger strategy to get us towards social change. What we've seen, I think, especially during the election of Donald Trump, was a resurgence of communities, especially women, saying, actually, if this guy can go and get a job in the White House, I can too. I can run for office. And so we've seen the powerful women, the squad, Rep. Cori Bush, who just came from St. Louis, who is now representing in Congress. And that's really powerful. It's really necessary. It also gives us a new vision around when we say go vote. In the past, so much of what we asked people to vote for were things that didn't really match our belief systems. But now we have people who are running for office. We have laws that are progressive, laws that we can vote for. And it's because of movements. You don't win progressive policy necessarily because of of people in elected office. You win progressive policy when movements shape progressive policy and progressive candidates. And it's our job as a movement to hold those people accountable and to implement those progressive policies. As we've seen, Dolores, I want to be like you when I grew up, the Dolores, you've been on the front lines forever, and you've kept showing up, and you probably have a million stories to tell us about all the amazing victories you've won and all the mistakes you've made. And I think that's what makes this work powerful. It's made up of human beings who have decided to keep their bodies on the line and keep showing up. And oftentimes those human beings are women.
So,
well, thank you on that note.
You're welcome.
On that, sorry I didn't mean to cut you off there. On that note, how do you think Joe Biden is doing so far? Do you feel that Joe Biden is, President Biden is being accountable to movement in the first couple months of his presidency? Dolores, let's start with you.
I think we see that President Biden is moving right ahead and taking care of the most important issue that we have, the pandemic right now. But it's also with his executive actions, which are quite bold. Talking about immigration reform. Just rescinding so many of the executive actions that President Trump did, and I'm very, very proud of him. But the other thing too, going back to your previous question about electoral politics, I mean, we know that so many of the laws that we need to pass, like the voter protection laws, the immigration reform, the climate change issues, these are not going to, even as much as Joe Biden may want these laws to be passed, if we don't have the majority in the House and the Senate, and especially the Senate right now, none of these laws are going to be passed because he can't do it by himself. And so that really goes back to your previous question about the importance of voting. And but I'm hopeful, and we know that just I guess yesterday, Javier Becerra was not confirmed to be the head of the the Human Services Department, or Health and Human Services, by one vote, by just one vote in the Senate. So hopefully they'll come back and confirm him. But this is why it's so important that we do the voting, and then we do the advocacy, and then we hold our representatives accountable. Michael Moore, I saw him on Broadway, and he said, we wake up in the morning, we do three things. We wash our face, we brush our teeth, and then we call our congressman. So the advocacy is extremely important. It's just as important as voting.
Patrisse, what do you think about President Biden's sort of accountability to movement so far?
I think that it's been a challenge. I think, as Dolores said, he came out very strong when it came to many of the executive orders, specifically around the pandemic. But there's still a conversation he's unwilling to have around police budgets, around holding the police accountable. Even with the Justice for Policing Act, that act actually gives more money into law enforcement. That act doesn't stop the flow of money into law enforcement. And what you heard last summer was a demand for reinvestment into our communities, was a demand to defund the police. And the fact that that's a non-starter for President Biden really impacts our relationship to the White House and our ability to move the policies we want to move forward. With that, our movement is grateful that we got a fascist out of office, and grateful that we can work with an administration that is interested in human lives. And so it's a process. I won't give up on the administration, but I will continue to take them to task on police accountability in particular, and also economic justice for Black people.
So obviously, we're hopefully, fingers crossed, close to turning a corner on the pandemic. But this has been a devastating year, in particular for the Black and immigrant and marginalized communities that were disproportionately affected by COVID-19. What do you think we can learn from this crisis about how to better address these inequities, and including those faced by women and women of color specifically? Maybe Patrisse, let's start with you.
Well, I think what we've witnessed and what we continue to witness with the global pandemic is a lack of infrastructure in our communities, both at the local level, at the state level, and the national level. We don't have infrastructure to fully care for human beings. We've spent the last 30, 40 years relying on and investing all of our dollars in mostly incarceration. And we've spent very little of our dollars investing in healthcare, mental health care. And we are seeing the grave effects of that. Yes, everybody should be washing their hands, wearing a mask, and not being in big gatherings. And we should also have a system in place in one of the wealthiest countries in the world where people are able to get better when they get sick. There's no reason why 500,000 people should have died because of COVID-19. And so I have to give a scathing critique to the US government right now, because many of us have been yelling for reforms around reducing prison spending, reducing police spending, and putting those dollars back into communities. And we haven't seen that. And now we're seeing the lack of infrastructure totally be exposed right now. And I think that's really sad. And I think we have a long ways to go.
Dolores, what do you think is the takeaway from the pandemic?
Well, it definitely spotlighted the lack of resources that go into communities of color. When the communities of color are the ones that have been the most affected, and more people have died, and even our indigenous communities, which were, just the statistics are just atrocious. And when we think that we are the richest country in the world and we have these health disparities, there is no reason why we should not have universal health care for everyone, because they do have this in countries in Europe, in countries in Latin America, even little teeny Cuba that has an economic boycott has health care for every one of their citizens, and also education. And I think that is another thing that we really have to talk about. And it's kind of sad when we think of all of the citizens in the United States that have this huge college debt. That is unbelievable. And we should have free college education for every single person in the United States. And then when we talk about education, We've got to have an education that addresses the issues that we've been talking about today, so that in every single school, starting from kindergarten, children should start learning the real history of the United States, the Howard Zinn history of the United States, the fact that it was the indigenous people that were the first slaves, that the African slaves built the White House and the Congress, and it has been people of color that have been building the structure, the infrastructure of the United States of America, that now needs, of course, so much attention. But we've got to end the racism, the whole idea of white supremacy. That's got to be eliminated, because we cannot afford to grow any more neo-Nazis, fascists, or white supremacists, because this is a threat to our society. And children of color are being deprived every single day because they are not have not been given an equitable education. And then we have the disparities in income. Again, there is no reason for this. I like to quote Rachel Maddow, who said, if we can pinpoint a place in Mars where we can actually send a rocket or this little machine that they send, or with a little helicopter, then how can we excuse the health disparities, the education disparities, the income disparities in our own country? I mean, we should be ashamed in our United States of America that we have so much poverty, and and so much discrimination. And this is not rocket science, you might say, but these are things that we can address, and these are things that we can correct.
Wow. Well, I so appreciate both of you joining us today. Thank you so much to Dolores and Patrisse for joining us here at the Time Voices of the Future Women's Summit. It's really been an honor. Thank you.
Yes, and we have to work for the Equal Rights Amendment for women, okay? It's going to be coming up in the Senate. Si se puede, we can do it.